Hey folks, welcome back to Crypto Heartbeat. This is Matt, and I am so excited to be on with the Gerardo. Gerardo, welcome to the Crypto Heartbeat family, man.
Thank you, bro. Like, I know you put out a ton of good, useful content out there, and it's much appreciated. Thanks for the intro. My name is Gerardo. For those of you who don't know me, I do videos on HEX, PulseChain, PulseSwap now, and all the fun new stuff in crypto. Yeah, creator of, did I say that? Creator
Yeah.
of
Oh no,
lookintohex.com.
look into hex.com. An amazing site, man.
There's a
That's
couple charts in there that people really like that help onboarding, that's like my claim to fame, I guess you could
yeah,
say.
it is.
But
It totally is. It
yeah, thanks
totally
for
is.
having me on. And yeah, let's get right into it.
Yeah, you bet. So I've been watching you since the early days, and I've been watching you grow and just really impressed. It's cool to see.
Thanks.
I mean, I think you've been extremely helpful to the community and probably, in my opinion, the most, um, I want to say, probably the most detailed, and
Mhm.
you created the most value, in my opinion, because of the charts and look into hacks and all of that.
Thanks.
So I want to know this. You know, I'm just amazed by your TA ability, but also, I mean, there's a lot of work you put into doing these charts. You're doing,
Yeah.
public and private content. Give me a background on like where do you learn all this stuff, man? You're really gifted.
Thanks, bro. Yeah. So I guess it all started when I was really young, and I have to give credit where credit is due. As someone like Gary Vee says, all the credit is to my parents, and especially my mother, who gave me like a really great math education when I was younger, just because I showed interest, and she was always the type to, like, whenever I would show interest in whether it be math or like this thing or that thing, just kind of like nurture it, let it run its course as it naturally should. And if it doesn't play out in the long term, like, that's fine too, because like you're just a kid, right?
Yeah.
uh and so I remember one time I was out with the neighborhood kids, and they were talking about some math stuff. They were older and I didn't understand it, and they mentioned something and were like claiming it was true. It was some like subtraction thing or something simple, and I went to ask my mom, like how it all worked, and she kind of just gave me a few math problems to work on, and like gave me some rules and whatever, let me play with a calculator. And just like, I must have been just like definitely single digit, like four, just really young, man. And I don't know, that might have been a seed, because over the years, just I was always, like, not to toot my own horn, but I was like one of the best in math in like almost all my classes
Yeah.
growing up until like university. Because at that point, that's when you meet the big dogs who are like
Yeah.
not forced to be there anymore. They actually want to be there. And you get into like more complex stuff. And yeah, I guess that really, with that kind of a baseline,
Yeah.
going to university, I switched around majors a ton, right? I got accepted under like a civil engineering because I thought I wanted
Huh.
that. And then I about a year, like 6 months or a year into that, I switched over to just like a pure math degree. Then what did I do? I realized like theory was just kind of just going to be theory. And so I transitioned into they had a engineering physics curriculum. And so it's really just, I was just nurturing the whole like math, tech, the whole STEM side of things,
Okay. Wow.
I guess all my life. And that gives me a background in just numbers, and spreadsheets come really easy to me because I worked with MATLAB. I don't know if you're familiar with Matrix Laboratory. You're just working with basically spreadsheets, right? Matrices are just like spreadsheets. So
Dude.
just a lot of that stuff.
Well,
Just to
and
answer the question,
well,
yeah.
and it's rare. I would say it's rare that those who excel in, especially on the mathematics side, can communicate so well too, because you got such a
Oh.
winsome personality and you're good at communicating. You're not talking down to people, which is very common, I think, when you've got somebody who's really,
Okay.
skilled. Well, tell me about how this kind of merged with
Okay.
finance and how you got into kind of TA as well.
No, no, that's a really interesting point you bring up, because that's like, that leads me into this, like the remainder of the story, which is I technically never got my full degree, because I technically, right, I dropped out. And I was, the reason being, I didn't, this was my thinking back then, and it kind of still is, was like, sure, you're going to get into a STEM field, you might have a handsome salary, and at the end of the day, I don't want to paint it like gruesome or whatnot, but the way I painted it when I was younger was like these corporations are farming your intelligence in a way
Yeah.
and devaluing it because it's really worth a lot more. But a lot of them don't see that because tech guys might not be as, or just STEM guys in general, like you said, might not be as versed in things like just business, marketing,
Yep.
all that stuff. So when I dropped out, obviously it was to pursue just entrepreneurial ventures, realizing that that was really the one of the few ways to escape the rat race, so to speak. And I dabbled in a few things, trying out like I tried to get into the fitness industry at first. Not a lot of people know this, but kind of started out social with trying to grow Instagram, like fitness industry. Realized I was in my calling, but like really hard to pivot, as you can tell.
Yeah.
I guess to kind of glue the narrative together, I was trying all that stuff during university.
Okay.
So it's not like I just like dropped out and just went like off the deep end. It's like I was trying this stuff. Um, yeah, and let's see, let's glue this together, right? I had to learn a lot of stuff about marketing, business, and just how the world works, really thrown into the real world.
Yeah.
And realizing that even people who get degrees and whatnot, they're thrown into the real world, and it's just as much of a shock.
Yeah.
So I guess I took the shock. I made it happen a little sooner than it would have. But yeah, then I don't know, man. I got caught up in the whole 2017 bubble that you probably
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
that attracted millions. I'm
Yeah.
guessing at this
Yeah.
point.
So let's talk about that. So you're, I want to hear this journey into, through crypto and into hacks.
Help me glue
Give
this
me that
together.
story. Yeah, give me that
Yeah.
story.
Totally. Okay. So at that point, what in university, trying entrepreneurial things, hearing about crypto kind of in the background, trying that. This is all simultaneous.
Yeah.
And yeah, the world's changing. I'm still young at that point, trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. 2017 bubble comes along. I learn about this thing called Bitcoin, learn about Bitcoin Cash at the time because it was the like the thing that was happening. It was being forked. It was worth
Yeah.
like $3,000 when I saw it.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. I think that was its all-time high. Still hasn't crossed it, right? So you hear about crypto, all these coins that now I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, and yeah, I just started watching videos on YouTube, and some people still around, and some people just completely disappeared off the face of the planet after that. But the ones who stuck around, there are like a few gems who I watched throughout that cycle, who I still do. Um, one of them being Richard Hart, obviously, and a few more TA guys. But yeah, that's how I kind of got into his videos. And then when I was just kind of struggling with the losses of the bubble and like trying to get a business going, it's really, really hard just from scratch and not knowing your path. I was like, at that point, what, a couple years past, I'm just like working random jobs, try to get stuff together, make my dreams happen. 2019 rolls around. I'm still watching crypto videos, and I get into the whole, as you know, that's when Richard started coming up with the idea for HEX.
Yeah.
I wasn't there super early while it was still like an idea like from the beginning, but halfway through that or 3/4 of the way through that, probably like what, September, October 2019 is when I started like really paying attention. So I was there for launch for sure.
Okay.
But yeah,
Dude, that's
that's
great.
kind of the glue.
Okay. So you're literally the OG Hexican. I mean, you're there prior to day one.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, that's really cool. So let's talk about one of the things that's amazing to me is, data visualization is really an expertise that you have, right? You've got Look into Hex, which is referenced by so many people, right? And your ability to bring the math, the spreadsheets, but then also present things. I mean, I've seen charts, but your visualization of data is actually there's a talent there that I think is beyond kind of normal visualization. Can you give any commentary on that?
Yeah, it's a lot of again, it came from the STEM classes, looking at just like derivatives of things, looking at ratios, relationships, just like key metrics, like just fundamental things that, and yeah, I learned how to make charts in whatever Python, MATLAB here and there. And Yeah, I mean, it really comes from there. It really comes from there. But I just saw these metrics. I'll have to give a shout out to the Intro the Cryptoverse guy, Benjamin. He does really great visualizations for Bitcoin, Ether, like all the other blue chips. I messaged him once. I was like, "Yo, like Hex, have you heard about it? You know, the whole
Yeah.
spiel, like." And like showing him, he was like, not really interested in it. I was like, okay, that's cool. I was like, I'd really love to see these some charts of his that he makes and other ones that he doesn't make, like made for Hex. I'd love to see. And I was like, well, then that whole business principle came to mind that if you scratch your own itch and
Yep.
create what you want to see in the marketplace, that's generally like the holy grail,
Yep.
especially if you enjoy it and are good at it and
Yep.
whatnot.
Yep.
And so I was like, okay, well, I could do this. And so I did it. And here we are.
Now, are you surprised how fast things grew for you in the
Yes,
community?
yes, very.
Yeah, I feel like I've watched you over the time just be surprised, hitting 1,000 and then hitting. I mean, are you over 10,000 now? I mean, you're close.
Almost, we're close, man.
Well,
The
let's get you
community's
over.
nuts. This community is so nuts. They're like the most engaged, not only crypto
Yeah.
community, but like one of the most engaged communities on social media I've seen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's no question. And really, I was expecting more kind of hate and haters. What's your thought on that? I felt like people have been surprisingly positive. What's your kind
Oh,
of
I
thought?
get I still get hate on my comments. I
Sure.
mean,
Sure.
I got a couple this morning already. Like it's a daily thing at this point. But I realized like once the algorithm starts pushing you
Yeah.
and shows you to new people, you start expanding out of your core fan base.
Yeah.
That's when you'll probably start getting more of the hate because it's like, okay, well, this kid's coming out of nowhere
Yeah.
talking about this coin that I've heard is a scam. Like I was actually wrong on my last call like a few months ago. I thought that thing forming was a bull flag, turned out to be a distribution top. So, but like the undertone of every single video is like not financial advice. Please like
Yep.
make sure you're being smart, whether that be averaging in at certain levels or just like having a long-term investment horizon or just like all these things.
Yeah.
But definitely get hate on the daily, get love on the daily, but
Yeah.
just it is what it is, man.
Yeah. I think the love does outweigh the hate.
Oh,
I've
oh,
found from this
definitely,
community.
definitely.
Definitely.
It's
Yeah.
like 95.5,
Yeah.
I think.
That's exactly what I would say. And you're good at
Ish,
ratios. So
ish, yeah.
let's talk about uh PulseChain. So
Let's
you obviously PulseChain is exciting. I would love to get your sense. I mean, I watched this last video on Pulseswap and everything, and I mean, I can tell the excitement in your voice, but give
mm-hmm.
me the rundown on kind of what your thoughts are as far as um, Pulse in general.
I'm in it for the tech.
Yeah, you are.
No, for real though. Like Richard Hart says this all the time. Like price appreciation is what matters. Once your cup runneth over, then you can like make the world a better place and whatnot.
Yep.
And yeah, with that in mind, like that, I'm assuming I think he said it. Like that's the most important thing
Yeah.
before like cheap fees, but we will have cheap fees until we don't. But at that point, like the price probably appreciated so much that you either don't care or we just fork the chain again.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And like, okay, cool. We have multiple chains, a bunch of free airdrops. Yay. But like I'm excited because blockchains are communications networks,
Yeah.
in my opinion, right? And I always wrap back around by saying like money is speech, right? Speech is communication. And so a blockchain is a communications network.
Yep.
And Metcalfe's law says that the value of a communications network is directly proportional to the square of the number of users. So you get this square effect. And if you look at the PulseChain Telegram chat, for example, there are like 50K plus members. It already flipped Hex on Twitter too, I think.
Yeah.
So Hex already did, 10,000x wick to wick. And right now it's up like 4,000x, 3,000x. So you get this like, you build a thesis, right? I think that's the most important thing. I'm not saying like it's going to go up in the first 2 months, down, like whatever. You build a thesis. And I think over the long term, these things just play out because you're not talking about time. You're just talking about like concepts.
So let's talk about that. So, I missed out on I was 10 days before big payday. So
Hmm.
I mean, I wasn't super early, wasn't super late, but I didn't go in big.
Hmm.
And of course, I paid attention to Richard Hart and saw the opportunity with PulseChain, and that's really exciting. So I started doing these interviews, and Balliet Brand was awesome and gracious with his time.
Oh, he's the best.
And he was awesome because he said, and this is what I'm really curious in your opinion, because I've looked at things and I listened to Richard, and everybody wanted to see a price prediction. That was like the last thing I
Hmm.
wanted to do because I didn't feel like I was qualified to give any predictions.
Right.
But he said, "Hey, look at Ethereum, look at other things, look at Hex, 10,000x."
Hmm.
And I always was under the impression that the only 10,000x you could ever see would be related to like sacrifice day 1 through 5
Hmm.
to 2.5 years, 3 years out.
Hmm.
That would be your 10,000x.
Hmm.
You know, when you look at Hex, though, when you basically say a 10,000x, you're talking about opening price to wick, not the sacrifice value. Is that right?
Mm. Hex, I was talking about all-time low to all-time high.
Right. Okay. Okay.
It didn't
So,
open at all-time low. It had a dip at first, right?
okay. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think that, with a sacrifice that, let's just say 10,000 to one,
Hmm.
right? And let's say that the basis in that, obviously it's no value at the beginning,
Hmm.
but there's a theoretical value with this 10,000 to one. So that's kind of, if you want to call it a price, there's kind of a price with that. And I can see a 10,000x, which is $1. Well,
Right.
you know, what are your thoughts on that? Because you talk about the square Metcalfe's law, and I
Hmm.
saw someone the other day saying, "Hey, if Hex can do 10,000x, this can be 5 times that," and I'm like, I can't even go
I
there.
saw that tweet. I saw that.
Yeah, I just
They,
can't go
mhm.
there. So what are your? I mean, obviously, if you look out 10 years, I think we're in a very different scenario. What's your thought? How should people be thinking about this?
Hmm. I mean, it's actually quite simple, right? Like Ethereum did, what did it do
Fourteen
from,
thousand.
yeah, it went from, actually it did 10,000x from 15-cent wick on
Okay.
Kraken to about over $1,500 on, it was early January 2018. So that was 10,000x in 2.5 years. And so when Richard built Hex, he said this is designed to beat it, just by the design being better, less negative externalities, more price fundamentals, all that stuff. Again, macro like thesis stuff,
Yeah.
not right. And so you just have this like really simple comparison saying, okay, this should outperform ETH, and it did the 10,000x in about 623 days, which is about 2/3 of the time.
Wow.
So I mean, same creator. So now
Yeah.
I guess you could have even a more apples to apples comparison.
Yep.
So I would just use that benchmark, 10,000x in 623 days. And I think it being the second project, think of like a neural network. The second generation is
Mm-hmm.
way smarter, right? Third
Yep.
generation gets smarter for it, like it gets way smarter. I think
Yep.
exponentially. Don't quote me on that. I don't know, but it gets better at some curve along some curve.
Well, and I think there's just some basic anecdotal stuff as well. Like, for
Mm,
example, the community is more mature. $670 million of value was sacrificed before the OA. I mean,
mhm,
there are
mhm,
some there, you're right. I mean, there's some differences. The other thing that's interesting is there were a lot of folks who got free Hex because they claimed it with
mhm,
Bitcoin, right? And
mhm.
that's just not even a factor in Pulse.
Right.
And then what do you think about the fee burning, deflationary concept of PLS as well? How does that
Yeah.
play in?
Again, I think that's like part of Richard's brainchild V2 kind of thing, like a
Yeah.
second iteration, generation, whatever you want to call it. Things get better. And I think he learned a lot just from the launch of Hex. I
Yeah.
think he learned a lot about how to launch a crypto, how to market a crypto. Don't go too heavy on the price appreciation narrative because people will scream scam. Like, so
Yep.
he's taken other pitches now. He's
Yep.
rotated into different styles and whatnot. So it's like, okay, you learned a ton. The community's bigger. The community's richer.
Yep.
It's, I mean, I don't see how it can't, like, it would be hard for me to see it not do 10,000x in 623 days.
Wow. I mean, you're blowing my mind, which is
But
awesome.
all time low to all time high, though, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So it
Wow. Yeah.
can open at, you know, it can go to a lower value than the cost people paid for it. That can happen.
Yeah.
Not saying that.
Interesting. So let's talk about this too. You know,
Yeah, that's an important point. Yeah.
yeah, and it would be, I mean, be interesting to see if it did that while addressing that very topic. You know, somebody mentioned, I think it was Crypto Panda was talking about this idea that there's almost like a pre-market price discovery that's happening with all these people continuing to sacrifice after day 19, right? And that obviously that's not real price, it's pre-market, it has zero value, but there's an interesting thing that's being established here, which I don't know if it's intentional by Richard or not to extend the SAC, but it's almost like people are continuing to pay. And I understand supply and demand, you know, what's something worth, what people will pay for it. And so if people are paying 3.5 cents for you know, a pulse point, you know, what's that mean to you? And what are your perspectives on that whole kind of pre-market price discovery?
I mean, it could end up being just like paying $100 for an ETH on like day one of their sacrifice. So what would that mean? It would mean you'd be at like net loss for like a year, 2 years.
Okay.
So that's still a possibility. I don't want to discard that. I want people to know that like it might, just because they're sacrificing here doesn't necessarily bind price, especially because like if you want to get really like analytical about it, there were hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars sacrificed early on. And the amounts now are like nothing relative to that.
Relative.
So,
That's a good point.
right. If you look at like a volume distribution, it's all like front loaded near the early rates. So I would think that would bond just like deep liquidity between two pairs bonds price. I would think like a lot of volume at a certain rate would kind of bond price there.
Totally. No,
right. So just because of that, I think maybe we see something similar to what ETH did, right? A lot of people have talked about this. I made a video early back in the day, and then Jenkins made a great, more detailed video on it, and just about what if price opens, I don't know, 5x, 10x above that rate, comes back down to the rate. So people are break even for the most part. Yeah. That's the ultimate bottom because people want to protect that price or buy there. And then just history.
Well, one of the things I've seen is a lot of people outside of the HEX community are picking up this whole largest airdrop in history, right? And I think that narrative is a really strong one versus you could be a billionaire, because that's how I heard about HEX. And so I think you're right, changing that narrative and this idea that there's going to be a solution to the big problem of ETH gas fees, but also this freemium thing. So, you know, obviously demand is a big thing. I picked this up on watching one of the meetups that Richard did. And he said, you know, PulseChain is designed to not dip as much as HEX did at the beginning. What do you make of that?
I think there's no AA lobby, and that's huge because you don't have like mass amounts of inflation being printed. So if the HEX inflation curve was what was it like? It went, I don't know the exact curve, but it inflated a lot the first year.
Yep.
And it depends, like if you smoothen it yearly, I think it's simple to say it inflated 100% the first year because it created the initial supply.
Yep.
And then after that, 3.69%. So this one's going to be 100% the first day instant, and then it's going to go to 0%. So you're squishing like a year into just like a point, like a moment, and then changing 3.69% to 0. Like relatively speaking, it should help price a little more.
Yeah, and deflationary, right? With the burning.
Right, and you're burning fees, so the fee market gets to help out with price too.
Interesting. Okay. So let's talk about, you know, it's funny you mentioned earlier this idea that, hey, we'll fork again and get more free airdrops. Well, we're going through that phase right now, right? And I think that's where some interesting opportunities, and that brings up PulseSwap, which we know is not going to be the name, evidently, right? That it's going to be called something else. And I love all the names people are coming up with. And so do you have a name that you've kind of come up with for the PulseSwap?
No, not at all. I mean, no, I have no idea. I hope it's cool.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. I'm sure it will be. So
do you have a name?
Well, I was thinking, you know, something related to the hive. You know, when you think about a community of people that come together, you know, think hexagons, and I think of bees and beehives and all that stuff. So there's some sort of hive swap. But anyway,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah, just fitting in with the kind of the hexagon
It's a good idea.
theme. But so here we got a sacrifice phase, and people have come onto my channel and they said, the haters will say things like, this should be an airdrop, it shouldn't be a sacrifice, and he's got enough money to launch this stuff, and basically it's like a money grab. And I certainly don't believe that. I think it's a huge opportunity. Any thoughts as far as this opportunity? You outlined Uniswap, and you did one on PancakeSwap, and you showed almost identical models, which I thought was really encouraging. I think 136% average increase or something like that, or X maybe.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about or explain? I mean, you already did a video on it, but I'd love to get your opinion on the sacrifice for the PulseSwap.
Yeah, I think there are a few reasons that it's a good idea to do it, because not everyone who's interested in like getting PulseChain is interested in getting PulseSwap and vice versa. So they're like independent groups. There's obviously a lot of overlap, but they're independent ideas. They're potentially independent interest groups. They're potentially from an accounting perspective too. It must be because you have to. How do I put this? I think it's common in traditional finance, correct me if I'm wrong, to bootstrap liquidity for an initial market with like the funds that were raised.
Yeah.
In like seed rounds or whatever.
Yeah. And what's interesting is his commentary on liquidity being provided by the sacrifice set.
Right.
You'd think he'd participate in that, or the OA would, but
you'd think, right?
Yeah, you'd think. But it is a really interesting opportunity. So if you can explain to people in probably the Gerardo way, as far as the opportunity, I just see on Richard's face the excitement and his tweets around the big opportunity with yield farming. And that's something you don't want to go into lightly. You want to do research on, but I can just tell he's saying this is going to be a really big opportunity. Can you explain what he means by that?
Yeah. So with yield farming, usually you put coins against each other in a pool. So you provide a pair of liquidity. And that's how these DEXs, right? Decentralized exchanges work. They're decentralized, right? By definition. So instead of the exchange, a centralized entity providing these coins for you to play with, sell, and like they really just match make. Again, the contract just it matches you with the pool versus you don't have to have two users online. So it's asynchronous, it's decentralized. It's like a beautiful thing, something like Uniswap. So, so liquidity providing on something like that is one way you earn fees in the native token where that DEX, like the chain the DEX is on. So like something like Uniswap, you'd earn the ETH fees. Something like PancakeSwap on Binance Smart Chain, you'd earn BNB fees, and you would also earn an extra token. And therein arises this idea of yield farming, whereas you put your tokens of a pair together and you gain the native token as well as like a bonus. We say magic internet money, right? Like
the LP
created. Yeah, the LP. So in the case of PancakeSwap, I think they earn cake. In the case of SushiSwap, they earn sushi. And in the case of this new PulseSwap project, whatever it'll be called, you'll earn some other ticker as well as PLS.
Okay.
So it's a way of, I guess, just earning passive. I guess it's a way of earning passive coins. That's your
yeah. And so let me toss this out. Let's say you've got some other ERC20 and you see this opportunity. You've got free on the Pulse side. You've got this free pair. You're like, wow, yield farming is a great opportunity. But there's also this issue of impermanent loss. And, I know that you're going to get fees in the LP token, but there's also some risk in that.
Of course.
If the community doesn't embrace the Pulse chain and you're thinking that, you could basically lose your value, right?
Yeah. So let's touch on like the largest airdrop in history, or not that, I'm sorry, the largest yield farming potentially project in history, and then a little bit into impermanent loss. So the reason why it might be the biggest yield farm in history is because it potentially bootstraps the entire Ethereum ecosystem. Because usually when you want to provide liquidity, like let's say you're a HEX maximalist and you only own HEX and you minimize how much Ethereum you want to be holding, but you want to provide at some point HEX ETH liquidity or HEX USDC liquidity, you have to sell some of your HEX. to actually get that Ether USDC in the first place, because you need to have it and you have it in equal value. So you would have to liquidate part of, your maxi stack, and then, provide liquidity that way. Whereas this, the fact that this is the largest airdrop in history means if you own Hex or Link or Uni or Aave or what, any ERC20 or NFT even, you get a copy of it on PulseChain, right, on another network. So you have you immediately get the other side of the liquidity pair for free.
Yep.
And so you don't have to liquidate anything. You don't have to sell your favorite coin, nothing. And you minimize the risk too, because you're LPing with free coins.
Yeah.
So it's not like you had them before. But okay, so impermanent loss. So we have to go into how the actual like DEXs work, decentralized exchanges, if you want, or is that a little too technical?
It may be too technical. I guess you've kind of answered the question as it relates to that other side being, you're reducing the risk by the other side being for free. Mm-hmm. The big question I've got is, and maybe you can, I don't know the answer to this, is let's say the opening price of my favorite ERC20 that's not Hex, let's say, which I don't have one, but let's say I did. What would the, if opening price, I've thought that there's potentially going to be some bargains because there's not going to be parity from the beginning. So let's say I see my favorite coin. I know that there's been some signaling from the project that they're going to embrace the PulseChain. And I'm like, there's a possibility the opening price at launch is going to be very, very, very low for that new PulseChain copy. Isn't that an opportunity for me to buy up a bunch of that on PulseChain, knowing that, hey, they're going to embrace this? And I would think it would run up to parity very quickly, but isn't there some concern on providing liquidity in that scenario where it's such an imbalance?
Right. Yeah. Liquidity providing is going to be, it's going to be weird for the first liquidity provider, which is why I think that might be someone like the Pulse OA, because the OA is getting all their coins forked too. So they're going to have they're going to have the sacrifice liquidity. I'm saying liquidity, right? No expectations of work from others, but that sacrifice value might be used to bootstrap certain markets, certain pairs, so to speak. Meaning like, okay, now by LPing, like other people don't have to endure like that volatility you're talking about.
Yeah.
So price might not be super, super low at the beginning of Hex on PulseChain. What if the opposite happens? Like I'm worried about the opposite. What if it's astronomically high? Then, because Richard has said to avoid people getting like the first guy just buying up all the ERC20s or PRC20s, a bot is going to come in. So we have to think like sequentially. First, there's going to be a fork. So the size of the Uniswap pools is going to be the same on PulseChain at the instant of the fork.
Right.
However, since Pulse is being diluted 1,000,000x the supply compared to Ethereum, then these pools are going to be astronomically tiny, because something like the Hex pool usually has recently like 8.5 million Hex in it and like 1,000 Ether, I think. Let me check my. Do you mind if I check my?
No,
I want to get you like actual numbers.
This is cool. This is very cool. I think this is actually, I haven't heard many people talk about this at all.
Cool. Awesome. I'm glad this is actually interesting.
Yeah.
Let's see. So the Hex ETH liquidity, there's about 930 Ether as bid support, so like $4 million. And on the Hex side of that, there's like 24 million Hex being backed by that value, I think. Something like that. And that gives it a price of about 17 cents. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So about 4 million Ether, or excuse me, $4 million of Ether. So about 900, let's say 1,000 round up, about 1,000 Ethereum backing 24 million Hex. So once the fork happens, you're going to have 1,000 Pulse backing 24 million Hex on that side. But that's 1,000 Pulse might be worth very, very little.
Right.
So that's why a bot needs to come in, the fixer bot, he calls it.
Yep.
And it's going to come in and inject a ton of Pulse into that side of the pair. And so he says PRC20 harvesting, but to me, it's just by the way Uniswap calculates price, you're just pumping the living hell out of um, the PRC20s that you
Wow.
harvest, right?
Yep. Okay. I got it.
So
Wow. Yeah.
you can, yeah, you can get in depth. You could be like,
Yeah.
okay,
Like,
how much liquidity does Hex take up of all of Uniswap?
yeah.
And like try to figure out how much it's going to go up. But
Yeah.
I think you might have a situation where price starts like ridiculous, but maybe not super high liquidity. And then it reaches parity from the top going down,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
maybe.
That makes sense. Well, what's interesting is
I have no
the
clue.
analogy that
It's
comes to
tricky.
mind is putting the paddles on somebody that's had a heart attack. I mean, in a way, this is going to be a huge shock to the system at the very
Yeah.
beginning, which is exciting. And so let's transition to this before we kind of wrap things up.
Yeah.
I look at every person wants something, right?
Yeah.
You joked about being in it for the tech. And I look at Richard Hart. Here we are coming up on the 2-year anniversary. There's a big party going on. There's a documentary film. There's all these things going on. And I look at the person of Richard Hart and I go, what does this guy want? Right. Because if I can understand what he wants, it helps me trust the process and the person. And so when it comes to the motivation, it's clear that he doesn't need money. Okay, that's obvious. So what's driving Richard, and what do you think what's his end goal with this whole thing? Obviously, he wants to be successful, but what is it really he's after in your mind?
Um, I, I use this comparison a few times. People don't always like it, but I say Richard Hart is kind of like the Jake Paul of crypto, because like people hate him for no reason,
Right.
and he comes out and like is, you could say he's undefeated, and you're like, okay, well, people eventually start warming up, and over time they might become one of like the greats. And I think legacy is what they're both after, because
Okay.
neither of these dudes like need a paycheck,
Right.
right? Like neither Jake Paul nor Richard Hart. Like that's why I compare them, because they're right. They're
Yeah.
both very, very wealthy, and they seek something much greater than a paycheck, which is legacy, whether that be donating to Sen's Foundation or maybe creating his own biotech accelerator he talks about. It's on his kind of like life roadmap. So it's really that. I mean, he's outlined it, right? What his
Yeah.
goals are. It's let people's cups run over with, the wealth, the relationships, the impact, the community, the family, all of that. And then they go and eventually they like the excess is so much that you just like spread it
Yeah.
and create more value for
Well,
the world.
that's and I agree with that, and I think that's what makes me trust him. Is I feel like his goal, when you're talking to somebody that already has money, there's no benefit to him at all to rug pull or to do
Right.
anything nefarious. And I think I want people to understand that is that I think they're very confused. The message often is confusing, especially if you watch live streams and such. But to see, there's I think a short-term respect that he's trying to get, but then there's also this long-term legacy. And so, I hope that at some point in time he ends up getting married and having a family, because I think that that's going to do some wonders for him. But there is this. I agree with you. I think the legacy piece of this, and it's exciting because it's funny. There's a lot of people that kind of wear their heart on their sleeve, if you will, that say, "Oh, I'm all about doing good," and in reality, they're trying to scam you. It's almost like it's the opposite with him. He's like, "No, I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm doing up front." And then we'll get around to that other piece here. I gotta knock this one out first, which is help you guys be really, really successful. And that's the thing I sense he's trying to do is if I can help you win, I win in the end. You
Yeah, I
agree?
mean, he's a businessman at heart, and as like gracious and everything as that sounds, that's also a core business principle, which is you have to create what's the word, disproportionate value for
Yeah.
your client, consumer, whatever, and make them think they're getting like an amazing steal, because they actually are, because you're actually creating value.
Yeah. It's
So
tremendous
it's
amount.
and so like you got this law of reciprocity
Sure.
happening,
Sure.
and it's just like it's interesting how the most generous actions serve the self like the most at the
Yep.
end of the day, which
Yeah.
is it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Dude,
think he
you're
really just understands life.
yeah. Well, okay. I find you to be 100% refreshing. You're a younger
Thanks,
guy than
man.
I am. You are incredibly smart, incredibly gracious. You communicate well, and it's amazing
Thank
to
you.
me. It's rare. It's rare. to have the, I mean, and you seem very wise as well. I mean, just the
Thanks.
terms that you're using, principles you're using, and all that stuff. And I'm just, it's so great to be in a community with you and to, contribute to
Likewise, man.
this and to be part of kind of rising the tide. What's your future? Here's what I'd love to wrap up with. I
Mm.
mean, in my opinion, you're a young guy. You might feel like, you're an old guy, but you're not.
Sometimes no, it's I
Yeah.
understand. Yeah, it's a
And
long journey.
it's, yeah. And so the question I've got is kind of what's your hopes? I mean, here you are,
Mhm.
you got into Hex early, you got into Pulse early, being
Mhm.
Pulseswap. I mean, this is significant resources. What do you want to
Mhm.
accomplish? What is your kind of long-term legacy?
Long-term legacy. Ooh, that's a big question. Should have done my homework for this interview. Um, I mean, I like what I'm doing now. Um, I think I think it's hard. Like it's important to have this long-term vision, but it's also very hard sometimes. I think it's
Yeah.
also powerful to focus on like what's currently around you. And as long as your principles are sound, like it'll get you to the right on the right journey. But honestly, lately I've just been modeling like Richard Hart's kind of ideas, philosophies, and all that because it just works. It's like a really good framework.
Yeah.
So like I found myself during different periods of my life listening to different kind of icons for whether it be like fitness or like sales or like whatnot. And for finances, I found Richard Hart and I haven't looked back since. And and he leads you into like not only that, but then the rest of his philosophies through like sci-fi. And so at this point, it's making Look into Hex awesome, releasing a V2 for that because I've reached out to certain key members of the community who know what they're talking about. So make that awesome so I can help the onboarding process of Hex itself
Hmm.
as it has been helping clearly. So make that a better experience for mobile. It's been like number one
Yeah.
priority on the roadmap. So it's like, I think just building it from the scratch up, which I'm kind of working on, is what'll help that. So that's kind of first. Um, and then that just kind of like just continuing to make content for the community, being part of the community for the next, I don't know how many years. Like I don't have a set date where I'm going to stop. Right. I
Yeah.
don't know. I'll just let
Yeah.
life kind of take me along for the ride.
Now, are
Make
you retired? Do
easy.
you not have a day job?
I mean, it's been a few years where I just like do like entrepreneurial stuff. So I like to
Okay.
keep busy. Since last year, I've been doing graphic design, actually, some Facebook ads here and there. So that's kind of what actually allowed me to invest in Hex in the first place. So knowing that I like have a love for it and continuing to like level up and I do all my own thumbnails. So like
Yeah.
graphic design kind of interests me. Um, Playing with Adobe Suite is pretty
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
Um, but day job, like again, it's just entrepreneurial, like
Yeah.
random stuff here and there.
Well, that's what's so great about,
Yeah,
the internet in these days. You can be anywhere
yeah,
doing anything.
basically. So I keep busy as a
That's
short answer.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really neat. Well, it's I appreciate your time and it's good to,
Likewise,
I
man.
get to see all of the, the analysis and everything. It's really cool to see the kind of hopes and dreams and history and future and all that stuff that you got going. And I wish you well and look forward to um paying attention to your perspective because I learn a ton from you and I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you, thank you, thank you,
Hey,
Matt.
thanks for your
Appreciate
time.
that, bro. That sounded like an outro.